Hey super friends, my name is Neil and welcome to this episode 111 of the Get Your Comic Con podcast. We are here fortnightly-ish to bring you a slice of film, TV and pop culture goodness from our studio direct to your listening device. This episode I am going to be reviewing a brand new movie which is dropping in UK cinemas this weekend called Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I am also going to be talking to you about a brand new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic book called Black, White and Green, which dropped its very first issue this week. But before I do that, I want to catch you up on what's been going on in Geico Tower recently, and we also obviously have some very big news that we need to be covering off. In the last couple of weeks, I've been to a couple of very, very cool events, one of which was in fact for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I went to what was referred to as the UK launch of the film, so there was a big red carpet at the BFI IMAX in Waterloo. Director Wes Ball was there, along with cast members Freya Allen, Kevin Durand and Owen Teague, and we got to see, interestingly, 30 minutes of footage from the film. So we didn't get to see the whole film itself, I got to see the first 30 minutes of the film. But basically, they threw this huge party to launch the film, presumably just because the cast are very, very busy. Obviously, Freya Allen is about to start shooting on the brand new season of The Witcher. Owen Teague and Kevin Durand are both very, very busy, in-demand actors. I mean, we just literally saw Kevin in Abigail in cinemas just a couple of weeks before this event happened. So he is very, very busy at the moment. So they brought them to London. We did a very, very cool Q&A with them before watching the 30 minutes of the film. Andy Serkis was there, who acted as a creative consultant on this film. He is obviously the god of all things motion capture and was in the last trilogy. So he was there to walk us through some of the Q&A and to just talk about his role in the film, as well as then allowing the four guys from the new film itself to talk about it. And we got to see half an hour of the film from the very, very beginning, no spoilers, right through to quite an exciting instant that showed just how big in scale and scope the film was going to be. But I will talk more on that a little bit later when we get to the review. Just to say, actually, as I am recording this little bit that you are hearing right now, I haven't actually seen the film yet. I am recording this the day before I see the film. I am then going to record a little bit more once I've seen the film so that you can get my review really hot off the press, ready for this to drop when the embargo lifts, which I presume at this point is going to be on Thursday morning. I also got to go to a very cool event with Paramount Plus. We are very, very lucky in the UK that Paramount Plus do some very, very cool events. Recently, James and I were at the red carpet premiere of the Knuckles series. I've been to see premieres for shows like Wolfpack and Strange New Worlds. It's been very, very cool. But I got to go see something a little bit different from them, which is a new show called Insomnia. It's starting in the UK at the end of this month. I can't talk about the content of the episodes or even what was discussed at the event in the Q&A. But they held a very cool premiere here in London where they showed us the first episode. Sarah Pinborough, who wrote the show and wrote the book on which the show is based, was also there alongside the star of the show, now legendary UK actress Vicky McClure. It was very cool, a very cool event for what I think is going to be a very exciting show for Paramount. It's produced by Sony Pictures Television and distributed by them and screening on Paramount Plus. It's a 6-episode series, of which at this point, as I'm recording this, I've seen the first half of the show, and I'll be bringing you some more thoughts on that in the next episode of the podcast, by which time the embargo will have lifted and the show will be preparing to launch. But again, a really cool event, which has given me some really exciting stuff that I'm looking forward to talking to you about. It's a very dark, very twisty, potentially slightly supernatural psychological drama about a woman played by Vicky McClure, who also exec produces the show, who is suffering from insomnia as she is about to have her 40th birthday, and there is some family history there that kind of circles 40th birthdays and people in her family and what that might mean. They just dropped a trailer for it, actually, which you can check out over on the website, and it looks really exciting, and I want to say more, but I can't yet because it is under embargo. So those have been two really, really cool events that I have been at recently, and the next thing for me is to go see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes in full, which is very, very exciting. But for now, let's talk about some news headline stuff. So I will shuffle my imaginary papers. I'll just shuffle something near the microphone so it sounds like it. And let's jump over to the news desk and talk about what's been going on in the last couple of weeks. First up in the news this week, I want to talk about another interview that James has done very, very recently. You just heard snippets of 2 of his interviews in the last episode. You heard him talking to the author of a recent Star Wars book and also to Adam Pally from the cast of Knuckles. Today he is chatting to legendary author Madeleine Roux, who has just published a new book, the first in a new line of Marvel books through Del Rey and Penguin Random House, which is a new series of What If books. And Madeleine has written a book called What If Loki Were Worthy, and it's a version of Loki's story as if Thor has died, and Loki is the one who will pick up Mjolnir. I haven't read it yet. James has had the chance to read it and had a chance to sit down with author Madeleine Roux and discuss it. You can watch their full interview over on YouTube, and it will be on a future edition of the podcast. But for now, check out a little snippet.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a really surprising partnership, and like you said, there was this, a lot of pulling and a lot of tugging, but when they do come together, it's always really nice for both their characters, especially with what's going on around them. And you kind of touched up a little bit on some of the, I guess, challenges. And when you're dealing with beloved characters with rich histories and with canons and stuff like that, what sort of obstacles can you sometimes be faced with?
Yeah, it's tough, it's I think it's easy to get into sort of the trap of like, oh, I have to over explain all of this. I have to somehow fill you in on 30 years of of backstory, which is not really what I'm here to do. And I think you have to really stay focused on what is the story we're telling right now about these characters, and own and being very critical and having a very like fine-tuned eye for like what details of their past are so important that you have to put them on the page, or which ones are like great and hook back into what you're doing, right? Like um this like pulling in Yarnbjorn a lot, the axe that has sort of passed back and forth between Thor and Valkyrie. That was a huge thing because, Thor sort of puts her on this quest, and to have like a physical symbol of a passing of a torch kind of thing is very useful, and it also colors in her backstory with like giving you a sense of how long she's been around and how successful she's been as a warrior. So, you know what I mean? You're sort of looking for those pieces that have come before, but that embellish and enhance what you're trying to do currently, right? Or like, Tony's backstory with his parents is a very useful thing to touch on a few times in the book because it links so closely with the journey he's going on in this and the trauma that he's already experienced, that sort of like makes colors in more for you why he would respond the way he does. But yeah, I think it's a mistake to get too bogged down in like, hey, remember when they did this, this, and this, and this, and this? It's like I'm very like, of course there are a few cameos, of course there are a few small callbacks here and there, but like most of them are incredibly intentional, and I feel very resistant to the sort of like we're just Easter egging to Easter egg to like fan service that way. That is not for me. I kind of
Yeah.
couldn't care less. Like I feel like you have to move it forward, and I'm only pulling in things that, like Warren Worthington Angel has a cameo, but like it's intentional because it's sort of like I want you to see very early on that like Tony Stark is not your friend. And, you know, these billionaire dudes are not your friends. They live a life, they may as well be aliens from outer space. They do not live the life that you and I live. And like, I need you to feel that. And so choosing him, it's not just like, oh, ha, ha, ha. Like, look, it's a, remember him? It's like, no, you need to feel this sense of like, there are people operating in this world that are on a different stratosphere, right? And that, like, they couldn't really be more different than someone like Jane Foster and her, her little family that she's got going. So a lot of that stuff like seems like it's just for funsies, but there's all for me, I always have to have an intention behind it. I never just want to throw something in just to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. Talking of Tony, I think it was very interesting to see how different, kind of like my version of Tony Stark is compared to how you kind of craft Tony. And it was hard seeing him like that to a certain degree. Like you said, the way that he responds to things. But I think one of my favorite things is how you develop Jane. with her family, but also with her own grief, because she doesn't get a lot of time in the movies or stuff like that. So to actually have her time where you can dive more into what she's feeling inside, I think was a really good touch. Were there any characters that you really, really, really enjoyed working on?
Oh gosh. Honestly, all of them were so interesting in different ways. Pretty like just like 2 months before I got brought onto this project, I actually lost my own brother. Very suddenly, and so I didn't know if I was going to do this because I was still in shock, and it's sort of the real, like, the depths of grief, and then here comes Marvel being like, hey, do you want to write a book about a brother killing a brother? And I was like, whoa, that's a lot to take on right now, but it ended up being a very cathartic and
Yeah.
healing experience, because one of the things I got to do was really consider loss from so many different perspectives. There were days where I'm sitting in it from my sister-in-law's perspective, from my mom's perspective, from my dad, right? Like, you're sort of taking it from every angle. And that was like it was really interesting for me. It was very eye-opening. It was very illuminating, but I also think it gave me a very unique window into sort of all the different ways people respond to a grenade like this going off. And I think it let me tap into some really, like, raw and real things. So it was kind of a pleasure to get, not fun. I shouldn't say a pleasure, but you know what I mean. It was sort of like it there was something good about sitting in that, about, like, considering it from outside of my own perspective. I know how it made me feel, but now I have to sort of go around the table and think about how all these different people would consider, these losses. And yeah, I think, Tony honestly was, like, to me, an incredibly fun and engaging person to write, because he is, like, so different from me in so many ways. I just finished watching Succession, so, like, that was very top of mind and felt like such a perfect sort of way into him. I shamefully watch a lot of Housewives content, a lot of Bravo content. So, I have the vocabulary of the excessively wealthy, and narcissistic. So that was it. And it was also very fun. It was like, okay, it's Tony if he never gets his cave moment, right? He never evolves. He's still the dirtbag playboy. He hasn't had his sort of, like, hero coming into his heroic moment yet, and he sort of gets it in a unique way at the end of this book. But we're staying. It's like if the first 15 minutes of Iron Man was like an hour and a half, right? Where you're
Yeah.
just dealing with someone who's like, oh my God, you're so self-indulgent, you're so, like, navel gazing, you're so short-sighted, you're so obsessive. But I don't know, like, characters like that are actually quite enjoyable to write, because they're so, like, it's so specific. It's so easy in some ways to tap into that mindset because it feels so specific. Whereas, and as when it's a villain too, you kind of want it to feel larger than life. You want it to have that sort of, vicious edge to it, which I always find very enjoyable. So.
Thanks to Penguin for setting us up with that interview. James is loving talking to authors. That's one of his favourite things to do. And so it's been very, very cool. And as I said, you can listen to that interview in full on an upcoming edition of the podcast, or you can head over to either our website or our YouTube channel to watch it in full now. That is www.getyourcomiccon.co.uk, or just head over to YouTube and search Get Your Comic Con and you will find us there. Now, the other big news, which is completely unavoidable to talk about, and I'm glad I had not recorded this podcast any earlier, is very much related to the t-shirt that I am wearing right now if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, which is that James Gunn has surprise dropped our first full image of David Corenswet in his full Superman suit. We have seen the suit. We've seen it in some very specific lighting and in a very specific position, but we have now seen the suit. Now, I know a few of you have said, why do I think that he has dropped this now? And the reason for that is that they are, where they are in production on Superman at the moment, They have finished working in studios for the time being, and they're about to go out on location. And going out on location means that they can obviously get caught by fans who know where they're shooting or members of the paparazzi. And so Warner Brothers and James Gunn specifically wanted to get in front of any blurry, leaked fan images of the suit and give us something that we could kind of devour that would give us a tease as to what this suit is going to look like. Now, we don't know how many different suits he will wear in this film. We don't know if there's an A version and a B version. You know, we don't know if something's going to happen to the suit that will mean it needs to change at some point. There are some things about the image that we have seen, which, again, you can check out on our website or on my social media or on our social media, which differ to the logo which was released by Gunn a little earlier. So we know he released a logo, you know, the chest plate of the suit on Superman's birthday a few weeks ago. And it's the same S that's on this new suit, but it does appear a little bit different. And that could be due to the fact that this suit is quite dirty and battle damaged, but it seems like there could be a little bit of variation there, or perhaps that logo that he released a couple of weeks ago was not from the suit itself and was from something else related. So the image itself, if you've not seen it, is of David Corenswet sitting in a chair, pulling on one of his boots, and in the background there is some stuff is going down in the Metropolis skyline, which we will get to in just a second. The suit itself, I think, looks magnificent. I'm very, very happy with the design of the suit. It's very clearly inspired by what I think it's very much inspired by the New 52 era of comics, which is very much the kind of mid to late noughties onwards, before DC rebranded with the Rebirth era. So there is more of a collar to the suit. It rises a little higher on his neck. There is more paneling in the suit itself. So what you can see from the image, there are some quite definitive lines across the shoulders which separate them from the arms. There is some paneling in the arms and on the knees of the suit, which just add a little bit more texture on top of the texture that's already in there. And I think one of the main differences with this suit, which I'm actually quite intrigued and excited by, because it could mean a number of things in the story, is the fact that you can see some creasing in the shoulders just because of the position of David Corenswet's body as he is leaning to kind of pull the boot of the suit on. Now, some people have said on social media that it makes it look somewhat baggy and misshapen, or like motorcycle leathers, but I think what's a kind of important thing to remember is that James Gunn is very much a comic book fan, and if you think maybe more traditionally in terms of what we've seen in comics, the suit is something that Ma and Pa Kent, who have been cast for this film, help him to develop. You know, the cape is often portrayed as the baby blanket that he was wrapped in the ship that arrived from Krypton, and that the rest of the suit is something more man-made and human in terms of its material. And I think if you look at almost every version of the suit that we've had on screen in recent years, they have been more skin tight, almost like a second skin or like a membrane that Clark wears. Whereas I think what's really important, and I think what James Gunn is trying to say with this image, and certainly how I interpret this image, is we're seeing that this is a man who chooses to put on this suit, and that's why it's more human in design and human in appearance, in the kind of crafting of it, because you're seeing him choose to put the boot on, and this is a costume that he has chosen to put on rather than something which is like a second skin, if that makes sense. I can see that they're almost going for a kind of firefighter pulling on a uniform type vibe with this image. He's got the curl of hair that's there. He looks very serious, and there is a lot of scarring on the chest of this suit, so clearly there's been some kind of battle. It's not a still image from a scene of the film that we are aware of. It's a specifically posed image of him in the suit that was created for this. But let's touch on the background for a second. If you've seen it, you know that there is a kind of glowing pink orb in the sky. There's a little bit of a kind of tealy blue green in there, and it's firing some sort of beam out across the Metropolis skyline. Now, the instant kind of reaction would be, is this Brainiac? But it doesn't have that kind of metallic skull-like structure that you would imagine from a Brainiac ship, although green and pink are two colours which do feel quite inherently sort of Brainiac, if that makes sense. But I don't think that's what it is. To begin with, I thought this was perhaps something that was a bit more Bizarro related. Maybe a kind of beam to his Earth, but then it's a round orb in the sky, not square. So the kind of sleuths of the internet have been digging, and what we have come up with is there are some panels from Justice League International number 7 which show a kind of orb-like structure in the sky, which is kind of yellowy gold in appearance, but has the segmentation like what we see in this new David Corenswet image, and the pink beam. And funnily enough, that is something to do with Maxwell Lord, who we know is in this film and being played by Sean Gunn. Now, the fact that it comes from a Justice League International book I find very intriguing, because there has been a rumour recently that they are also working on a team-up movie coming in the future, which would be a Justice League International rather than a straight-up Justice League or Justice League of America. So it's interesting that there is that rumour and now the visual in this image, because they would seem to go together. Now, we don't know that for sure. It's obviously just guesswork on my part, but it seems like this could be something to do with Maxwell Lord, and we could be hinting at the kind of Justice League International characters and that type of storyline as maybe the direction of where Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters is going to go for the DCU. But that's probably enough for me. I asked you guys on social media what you thought of the costume, so let me read out some of your responses that you came back to me with. Paul from DC World said, "I love it, no matter the changes, it's still Superman and he's the iconic hero." Dr. Luke Deckard said, "I like it mostly. Colours, the S, the apparent return of the trunks." Yes, how could I not say that between his arms on the suit, you can clearly see a flash of red underneath his belt, so there are definitely the trunks are back. Hashtag the trunks are back. My small gripe, this is what Luke was saying, my small gripe is the superfluous design lines all over it, which is what I pointed out as being part of the New 52 inspiration. It's something that Marvel does a lot and I dislike it. It would have been a 10 out of 10 if it were cleaner on that side, but it's a solid 8 out of 10. And that's funny, that's something that in some ways I agree with. I quite like it here just because of the inspiration and where I think it's coming from the comics. But what Luke is saying is right, there are a lot of Hollywood designs for superhero costumes that are quite simple in the comics and become overly complicated on film just to give them more texture to pick up on camera, as if it needs to be more interesting for us to be engrossed in looking at it on screen. Kibler from the Brothers Geek Out podcast said, "I'm absolutely loving it. James Gunn's incorporation of comic book inspiration is fantastic in this rendition of the suit." The Mark Knight said, "I love it. It's New 52 era, well spotted. Haters just gonna hate." We have Ronnie Dodge 1994 who says, "I love it, and the New 52 inspiration with the collar and the trunks are back where they belong." And then Just Croc shared a gif that said, "I like it." So thanks very much to you guys for getting in touch. If you want to reach out and chat to me about the suit or anything else, you can find me on social media at Neil Vag, or you can find us just on all major platforms as at Get Your Comic On. Make sure to follow us, and if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel at the same time. You can get more of James's interviews from Junkets. There is another one coming up that we're hopefully doing very, very soon, and you can get all the video content that we publish. That is it for the news this week. If you want to keep up to date with the latest stories, then please head to our website, www.getyourcomiccon.co.uk, and for the latest breaking news, as I was just saying, make sure to follow us on social media. So now, let's share some of our thoughts on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So it is now 24 hours later than where you literally just saw me, and I am just back from having seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes at the cinema, and this is well and truly a 4-star movie for me. This was so much fun. I can finally talk about the first half an hour that I'd seen as well. So what we had seen in the half an hour preview a couple of weeks ago was pretty action-packed. It starts out almost like a nature documentary and quickly becomes something else. Obviously the apes are talking, so that kind of helps give it away that it's not just a nature documentary. But it ended in the middle of this huge action sequence, which is kind of a big turning point for the main character, Noah. I should probably say who's in this film and do the synopsis, but we'll get to that in a second. And now I've been able to see how much the film builds on that. It runs for about 2.5 hours. So to go on from that first half an hour, there's a lot more story to tell. And my God, does it really, really pack it in. So let's just do the basics. So Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is in UK cinemas from today, as you are watching or listening to this, is directed by Wes Ball. It stars Owen Teague, Freya Allen and Kevin Durand as the 3 leads. So Owen Teague plays Noah, who is our lead ape. Kevin Durand plays Proximus Caesar, who is our new kind of de facto villain ape. And Freya Allen plays a human who you will know from the trailer by the name of Nova. The film also stars William H. Macy and Peter Mason. Dickon Lackman also turns up, which is a fun one. I'd forgotten that she was in it. And the synopsis, I don't actually know the official synopsis for this film. Basically, it is set, I think it says on screen, many centuries later after the previous trilogy, of which the last two films were directed by the brilliant Matt Reeves. It picks up many centuries later as the apes have developed their own civilization. They no longer all live together under the rule of Caesar, because obviously he has long since passed. And they now have different clans which belong to different species or different tribes and different groups, and they have different ways of living, and they have all adapted to the legend of Caesar in different ways, which is really exciting to see. So the film spends a lot of the first act setting up the way that the apes now live. We spend a lot of time with Noah's tribe, clan, whatever you want to call them, who do a lot of work with birds. They speak to birds, they sing to birds, they do a lot with the bird population, and they work together in kind of harmony in this wonderful overgrown city that once was. You never really learn what city it was, but it's now this lovely, really overgrown, green, luscious earth space that they live in. And what eventually happens is they come across not just a human played by Freya Allen, but they also come across this other rival clan run by Proxima Caesar, Kevin Durand's character, and his interpretation of the kind of teachings of Caesar are very different to what we know of as Caesar from the trilogy and from what others who you meet along the journey in the film think of as Caesar and his legacy and his history. So it's really interesting to see how all of that works. There's a lot of care and attention that has been put into building that world. I should say, actually, the script was written by Josh Friedman, and he has done a really good job of building a world which has moved on from the previous trilogy. As I said, we are many centuries later, but still hasn't brought us into the world of the 1960s original Charlton Heston movie and that world yet. We're not there, and we're not there. We are very much kind of between the two. And so what this film is doing is beginning to bridge the gap. And I think if we were to get more films, we would probably move on in stages to bring us closer. I don't know, because there's no year given, and we don't quite know how much space is left to tell story, but there is more story that could be told. What I think is what's really difficult to talk about is too many aspects of the story, and 20th Century held back on allowing anyone to see it until tonight as I'm recording this, which is the night before release. And although the review embargo has lifted and you can see it's reviewing well online, the majority of critics haven't seen it yet because they're obviously trying to hold back some plot points, and so I don't want to spoil any of that. So if I talk about some of the characters, Noah, played by Owen Teague, who is our lead, is a young ape who witnesses this horrible thing that happens to his family and to his clan as they get taken prisoner and held hostage by Proxima Caesar. And he goes on this huge journey from being, at the very start of the film, someone who is preparing for what they call the bonding ceremony, which is where you get an egg and you get your bird and you begin to bond with your bird, to where we find him at the end, which is a really wonderful full circle arc that is to do with his father and a character called Raka, played by Peter Mason, who you will meet kind of partway through the film. And it takes him on this wonderful arc that brings him to a point where he kind of accepts his place within his clan and within his people, and has a much wider understanding of the ape world, and even to a certain degree an understanding of the human world. So there is a lot of character packed in amongst all of the action. But Noah is a really wonderful lead. He's very again, this is kind of aided by the motion capture and the fact that they were actual actors on set playing out these roles. But he's a very, very warm, very emotive, and in that respect very human type character for a CGI ape. But you can see some of, and this is the same for a lot of the apes characters, particularly Kevin Durand as well as Proxima Caesar, but you can see the actors' faces in the characters themselves. If you think about how much Andy Serkis has controlled and worked on and developed the world of motion capture from his time as Gollum right up to now, where you could see his face in that character, but it was more of a a recreation than a reflection of what he was doing. Right now you are really seeing the performance of the actors in this film, and that makes it a lot easier to connect with those characters on screen when they're fully CGI but have these incredibly emotive faces. And so Noah is partly able to communicate through speech, but also communicates through sign language, and you just get this wonderful glimpse into the life of this young ape, and how when everything is ripped away from him, how he reacts to that, and how he just what's the word I'm looking for? He just chooses and accepts that the thing he needs to do is to go and get his people back, and why he does that, and his motivation for doing that, and what that means to him, particularly for rescuing his mother, his love interest Sunna, and his best friend Anaya, and how that relationship is kind of forged and builds throughout the film as well, to where you find it in the climax. I really don't. It's really difficult to talk about Freya Allan's character without spoiling the film. If you have seen the trailers, then you will know that there are some aspects to her that make her an important character for Proxima Caesar, and he wants her for a specific reason. She is a very special human being. She is a type of human that we don't see very much at this point in the world, and because of certain talents that she has, that means that she is a prime target for Proximus, because he needs her for something very specific, and that will all become very clear in the second half of the film. And certainly the third act is very much based around what she can do, what she knows, and where her story wants to take her. But Freya Allan, I only really know her from The Witcher, and most people will only know her from The Witcher, but she does a really good job of communicating through just facial expression and movement, more so even than the apes, which is really interesting, because they're able to speak and they're able to communicate through their sign language, whereas her character is essentially mute for the first half an hour, 40 minutes that you see her on screen, and only later does she begin to communicate more and have the ability to communicate more. And so more power to her that she is able to do that through just her facial expressions and her movements. It's almost like her role is more difficult than the visual effects motion capture ape roles in that respect, which is really kind of backwards when you think about the premise of the film. But she does a really, really great job, and Kevin Durand is just amazing as Proxima Caesar. He was, I mean, you can see it from the interviews that he's done, and from the event that I went to that he was at, you could see that he had enjoyed being in this film, but he really owns the screen and inhabits the ape fully. I mean, there was an anecdote at the launch where he said that he almost needed an ape school to get into playing the role, but then he needed a human school to get back out of it later. And I can believe that, having seen his performance, because he is just so into it, which is really cool to see on screen, and it plays out really, really well. And it would be interesting to see how Proximus Caesar got to where he was at the same time that Noah's tribe got to where they were at the start of the film. There would, not that I want to introduce another prequel into a series that's already a prequel series. A prequel of a prequel seems a bit Inception-y, but you could tell a story there very, very easily. Visual effects are obviously amazing. I looked so closely at a lot of scenes, particularly in close-ups of the apes, to look at the fur and the hair, as well as the facial expressions, and everything just looks great. You can count the individual hairs on their faces, which is really, there was no kind of loss of definition or anything there. There is a lot happening on screen, and it's all rendered really, really well, just as you would want it to, as is the world. The world is huge, and that's the reason that you hire someone like Wes Ball, cat passing by, to direct a film like this, because his work on the Maze Runner films was huge and had huge scope to it, and he brings that to this film. And you can understand why Nintendo and Universal have hired him for the Zelda movie, because the scale that he's able to bring is really impressive, even when not all of it is real. So I mean, there are shots that are entirely visual effects, and there are others that are, part real location and just enhanced with visual effects, but there is always an incredible scope to it that is just quite breathtaking to watch. So I think they have used the visual effects and the budget to the best of their ability, and it really stands out on screen. And I think in terms of films that we've seen this year, this is one of the best looking as well. Certainly compared to how some other recent blockbusters have kind of been critiqued for not having great visual effects, this is a film where you really don't have to worry about what you're seeing on screen. I just had the pleasure of seeing it in IMAX, and it looks wonderful, in floor to ceiling on that huge screen. It really looks great. There are a few moments where it's not perfect, but what CGI is, where it sometimes fell down is in some of the background plates and things, like when you see a very big ship for the first time on a beach, it doesn't quite line up properly, but those are really minor niggles in a film where 90% of the cast is completely made of visual effects and they all look perfect, and that's the main thing. There are scenes that have multiple apes in, maybe not hundreds, but certainly 30, 40, 50 apes on screen, and they all look great and they all integrate well together and they all integrate well into the environment. So that's what really counts, and this film really packs a punch where it counts. I think that's probably all I want to say, because otherwise I'm going to get into too much spoiler territory, and I need to write my review as well. So hopefully by the time you're watching this or listening to this podcast, my review will also be out on the website, but I'm giving it 4 stars. That's my score. It is brilliant, and I highly recommend that you go check it out on the biggest screen possible that you can while it is in cinemas. And that's just to say that it is in UK cinemas from the 9th of May, and it hits theatres in the US, I believe, on the 10th. So basically this weekend, go see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. You will not regret it. It is going to be hopefully one of the biggest films of the year, and it's nice to see that we're heading into a blockbuster season where it's not dominated by comic book movies. This is a cool sci-fi, big, epic, almost in a way not dissimilar to Dune in that respect, which is cool that we're seeing these more on the big screen now. So go see it, and make sure to find me on social media. Let me know what you thought about it once you've seen it. So I probably told you already in this podcast, but you can find me on at social media as @NeilVag, that's NeilVagg, or you can find us on all major platforms at KU Comic Con. And I am now going to talk to you about a comic book, but I just need to quickly switch my screen to the right one. So I haven't talked about a comic book on this podcast for a little while, and I picked out something very special that I wanted to highlight. If you don't know, 2024 is the year that we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It is 40 years since they were first created, and one of the ways that IDW Publishing is celebrating that is with a brand new 4-part series, of which the first issue has just dropped this week, which is called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Black, White and Green. So it's an anthology book that has, in this first issue, has 4 stories, each of which have all of the colour drained out apart from black, white and green. They have 4 very, very different approaches, 4 very different creative teams, and they all take a different approach to both the visuals and the type of story that they're telling around the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So we have, the first story is called Green Screen, with story and art by Declan Shalvey. There is The Brutal Sword of Leonardo by Dave Barker and Jesse Lonergan. Then we have The Flame That Fuels You, which is written by Gigi Dutre. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I'm very sorry if I didn't. And Lorenzo Hall. And then we finally have Identity Theft, with a story and art by Paulina Ganuccio. So what I've also reviewed this over on the website, so you can go check it out. But what I have said is that each of these 4 stories takes a very different approach to style and tone, and also how they have adapted to the brief of black, white and green. So if you think about some of the classic kind of black and white comics, they are often reprints of other stories just with the colour drained out, or in the case of The Walking Dead, it's the exact opposite, where you can currently read it in full colour where it used to be black and white. And often it's kind of gimmicky when they do these things. But what I really like about Ninja Turtles Black, White and Green is just how each artist has decided that they can incorporate that. So if you look at Green Screen, for instance, it's used in some of the dialogue narration boxes, but then is also used to highlight key details. So it might be a bandana or a reflection or something that someone is holding. It's used to highlight key details, and it kind of picks up on that against a really, really monochrome background of the black and white. When you go into The Brutal Sword of Leonardo, the line work is all black, and then basically everything else in the story is green with some highlights in white. And it's more a case of just, let's do everything in green and see how we can pick out detail through shading and some different visual trickery. And then you go into The Flame That Fuels You, which has this really wonderful inky, murky kind of texture to it, which is, it's I mean, it almost brings it into an inky blue, but it's very black, and the only place that you see any green in there is in the dialogue boxes, which are all green. And then in the final story, Identity Theft, it's almost, I don't know if this is a good comparison or not, but it's used to highlight a specific character who has kind of like a Flubber-like quality, in that it's a kind of comedy, almost Ninja Turtles animated series kind of story about a creation of Donatello's, which it is rendered on the page in green, where everything else is in black and white. And it's just really cool to see how each of these teams interprets the brief, but also at the same time you have 4 very different types of stories. So green screen is a character portrait on Donnie. So if you are a Donnie, if Donatello is your favourite, like he is mine, then this is the perfect kind of story for you. The Brutal Sword of Leonardo is something a little bit more grown up, a little bit more adult, where it also has it kind of pushes the boundaries on the sci-fi limits a little bit. In The Flame That Fuels You is something which goes for a little more impact in terms of its visual styling over its story. And then Identity Theft plays in, as I just said, to something slightly more comedic and almost like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series. And what I think you have kind of packed into that is this kind of quintessential idea of what is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle story, what makes a traditional Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle story, or what is this franchise and what are these characters capable of, and you're able to see that kind of versatility through this book and through the 4 different stories. So I think it's going to be really exciting to see through the next 3 issues that come from following on from this, as to what other stories they try and tell and what other characters they try and focus on, and how other teams that might take part in this book might kind of adapt the brief differently again to what we've seen here. So it's really exciting. I think it's a cool way to help celebrate the 40th anniversary, when the main Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles book has just come to an end in the last month and is now on pause until July, when they have a brand new #1 that's coming up. I think it's going to be really cool to see where this series goes, but it's a really fun first issue, which I really highly recommend you go out. It's a bumper size as well. It's 44 pages, and it's available in comic book stores and on digital platforms now. So if you are looking for something Ninja Turtles, but you're not maybe willing or able to dive into the full series, but that's just come to an end because, 150 issues, it's quite a lot to read, or you're just trying to bide your time between the end of that series and the beginning of the new series in July, then I really highly recommend that you go check this out from IDW Publishing. You will not regret it. And if you want to read my full review, it's available now over on our website. Which brings us to the end of this podcast. My voice is starting to disappear because I'm obviously quite tired. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments on anything that I covered in this podcast, as I keep saying, please do find me on social media at Neil Vag and let me know what you thought. If you have chance to go out and see Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes this weekend, then again, let me know what you think. I'm dying to know what people think of it, and I'm excited for it to be out there so that we can talk about some of the more spoilery things from towards the end of the film. And perhaps stay to the very end of the end credits as well, because there might be something there that you want to see and or hear. In the next couple of weeks, we possibly have some exciting things that I can't tell you about just yet. We will have, sadly, be coming to the end of Star Trek Discovery. Episode 7 airs this week. I've seen both 7 and 8, so we only have 2 more episodes to go until the end of that. But no major screenings coming up just yet, so we'll have to see what happens between now and the next episode. But until then, stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you soon.